In this episode, we'll give you practical strategies to engage your stakeholders. Hello, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. This is episode number 511, and I am Cornelius Fichtner. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget, this is a video episode. So if you are only getting audio, then visit pm-podcast.com/511 or pm-podcast.com/YouTube to play the video version. And as always, when you are on YouTube, please do me the favor, like and subscribe. It really helps me to grow the channel. Well then, effectively managing stakeholders is a key project success factor. If they are engaged, they become valuable allies, and when not, they can inadvertently hinder progress. So, we want to explore today some realistic strategies to get stakeholders on your side without them getting in your way. And joining us for this is Barbara Kephart, just outside of Toronto, who will share her expertise on turning stakeholder relationships into a catalyst for project success. And there she is. Hello, Barbara. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Cornelius. Thanks for having me.
All right. Of course. And for those of you who don't know Barbara, here is, as always, our brief introduction. She is a UC Berkeley certified project manager with decades of experience across diverse industries. She is known for her collaborative leadership and innovative problem solving, dubbed the C-suite whisperer by clients. And she focuses on supporting executives as well as training project professionals to deliver high quality results that turn long-term goals into tangible realities. And Barbara started her company, Projects Pivot, because her clients kept asking, can we clone you? They needed a way to get more projects done right. So she thought, well, what if I could strategically support executives and train other project professionals who could deliver the same quality of work as I do? You can check all of this out at projectspivot.com. And with that, Barbara, we jump right into our first question here. What can our audience expect to learn today? And also, what exactly do we mean when I said during the introduction, stakeholders are getting in our way here?
Thanks, Cornelius. What a great introduction. What we expect to learn out of this is that stakeholders are not, they don't really mean to get in our way. They are there to, they're people. They're unique and they have different needs. So what the folks listening in are going to get out of this is learn how to handle the people behind your projects. There's so much. People are complex. There's so many things that they can contribute to a project, but we have to understand that they have a lot of different needs. We also have to understand that people can be very focused. We can be very focused on something that we're doing, and we don't realize that we might be getting in the way of the project manager who's trying to lead the project. They also could be frustrated. Your stakeholders, you may have them frustrated, or they feel threatened by the project that's coming in. And something that people fail to remember is that people have personal lives and that may get in the way of what they're trying to do in your project. They may have something personal going on with their boss. They may have something personal going on in their life that is getting in the way of them being able to be as high functioning as you want them to be. And the other thing I want people to know is that what you bring as a project manager in your communication skills did not start as being a project manager. In fact, I actually grew up in a very loud Italian Irish family, and I needed to learn how to work with these people. I needed to be able to know how to work around my family and get things done. And so that's actually why I created my company, because not only growing up in this very loud family, I also became first, before I became a project manager, I was actually a healthcare provider, and I did that for 20 years in medical technology. And I did very complex procedures on patients who were either really, really scared, they weren't sure what was wrong with them, or they were in extreme pain. And so my communication skills that helped me be the project manager I am now actually developed a long, long time ago. First, when I was a child dealing with my loud family, and then secondly, as my first career, which was a healthcare provider. So people need to know that what they bring forward in the way that they communicate and the way that they manage stakeholders actually doesn't happen right as you start being a project manager. You're bringing that from everything you've learned up to that point.
All right, we are currently live, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, X. And if you have a question, please don't forget that you can use the chat. So just type your question into the chat, send it off, and we will answer your question here live on the air. Thank you very much for participating. Let's get started here. We want to, first of all, understand the stakeholders' power and influence to navigate relationships, and how that, how we can prevent them from hindering the project. So let's start with a very basic question. What role do power and influence play, Barbara, in determining stakeholder priorities?
They play a huge role. And power and influence, people also, I've seen from people that I've trained and mentored, they have a tendency to kind of wait a little bit before evaluating that. And in my opinion, that has to be evaluated right away. How much power does somebody have to influence your project, and what influence do they have also as part of that power or not? And we also have to understand that they're going to come forward, as I mentioned earlier, with their own expectations, needs, perceptions, different attitudes, fears about the project. It's very possible that a project that you're leading may actually put them out of work once this, let's say it's a large technical implementation. There's maybe a fear going on around there, so you need to understand where their attitudes are coming from. We also have to remember that attitudes are either positive or negative. So sometimes they actually maybe, oh, this is amazing, this is an incredible project, this is going to be great. That's a positive one. Or the one I just mentioned, where they might be negative, saying that, oh, this is actually, we might lose our job after this project is implemented. Also, knowing that all of these expectations, the needs that our stakeholders are bringing to our projects, they're going to change over time. Because when you start the project versus when you're in a month in, or when you're hitting maybe the end of the project months later, depending on the project length, those attitudes are going to change. Now, trust is a huge component, which trust is its own topic within itself. But trust and them being able to trust you as a project manager is very, very important. However, they're not going to trust you until you understand where everybody fits into the power and the dynamics. I'm sorry, the power and the influence side. Also, remembering that there's politics. We all know about politics. And what politics is a process where influence is used to change the power of what's going on within your project to accomplish specific goals. So we have to figure out also, what is the political environment going on? You could have just a two-person project that is very, very actually political, believe it or not. And I've had it where I've had just two people on my team, and I can't believe the level of politics that come up and the level of power and influence those two people have in that project. You could be leading a project with a team of 100 and you don't have as much politics. So you need to understand where the balance and power goes on. Now, we're not going to get into details in this talk, but you can use various tools during this, power interest grids. I mean, I know, Cornelius, you teach this as part of your PM prep, and we learn all that. So we're not going to get into that. But whatever tool you use, make sure you do it, and you do it right away. Just because you do it right away doesn't mean you have to share it with your project team right away. And in fact, sometimes I tell people you may not actually want to share all the details of sometimes power and interest grid, because you might also, you're still trying to build your trust with your stakeholder. So you might not want to have that information shared quite yet.
And is that also the type of tool that you would use to determine the power dynamics that are going on between individual stakeholders and between stakeholder groups, or would you do this in a different way?
I would. A lot of times I start with the power and interest grid, and then I might put something like influence lines on top of it, where we kind of point on what direction the power is going. Sometimes I might just use a big old whiteboard and I just draw all the people on there. Many people think that they shouldn't be analyzing their stakeholders until the project actually starts. So let's say you're waiting for a start date or a kickoff or what might be. There is a lot of time that you can be starting to evaluate the power dynamics that are going on within your project. So another tool to use is just having conversations with people, inviting them out for a in-person or a virtual coffee. Starting to read all of the emails, because usually by the time we as project managers get a project, there's all kinds of email exchanges that have been happening between the leaders of the organization. So starting
Mhm.
to get that information fed to you, documents, old projects that might impact this one, that's going to start helping you figure out how you're going to make some decisions around this project, and in particular engagement, which once again, just like trust is a huge topic, stakeholder engagement is a huge topic.
Mhm. Yeah, and we'll be moving to trust in just a moment. But first, we already have our first question here coming in from, what is this, Facebook? No, YouTube. This is by Farouk Qureshi. Who do you think is more complex to deal with? Is it the internal stakeholders or external stakeholders? And Farouk, frankly, from my perspective, it depends. It depends on the type of project that you have to start with. Is it an internal project with external stakeholders, or is it a customer facing project where you do a project for a customer? Of course, that changes the power dynamics completely. And then, as Barbara has said already previously, it depends on the type of stakeholders you have in there. She had the example with two stakeholders internal. It seemed to me that there was an enormous power dynamic going on and politics, whereas 100 people may not lead to that many issues right there. Barbara, do you see, have you any, external harder to deal with than internal, or maybe government harder to deal with than
Yeah.
non-government?
Yeah, I give the same answer. It depends. Great question, by the way. It depends. When you do your research, when you're starting, as soon as, like the second this project crosses your desk, when you start figuring out the people behind your project, you're going to be able to help answer that question yourself. You may have a really tough internal stakeholder who is very enmeshed in the politics of the organization and very much against your project, never wanted it to happen. They themselves sometimes might have been wanting to lead the project and they're not happy because you're leading it. And so that could happen. External, you could have an external group. For example, you could have a very, very loud and political group that is against the project you're doing. We see this a lot in smart city initiatives, where those projects are coming on and people, there's groups out there saying, no, you're not going to be start collecting our information without our knowledge, and those groups could have a massive amount of influence on your project. My learning partner, who is interestingly, when I went to UC Berkeley, she's now my learning partner. She taught me project management. I love to use her quote. Her name's Cheryl Allen. She always says, cast a wide net as possible when you're first evaluating your stakeholders. And that stuck with me way back when I did my certificate of project management at UC Berkeley. Cast a wide net as possible with your stakeholders, because you don't want to miss one of those external or internal stakeholders. Internal stakeholders, you usually can pick them up. Sometimes you might miss the quiet ones and then they come in later on. But external stakeholders, if you don't cast as wide a net as possible, they can come in and mess up your project later on.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Farouk. We are moving on from the power dynamics to trust building. I mentioned that earlier on already. Barbara, you've already mentioned going out for a coffee. But what does trust building truly entail when engaging with stakeholders? I assume the coffee itself isn't it, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's a good start. But trust. So if you're leading projects and people don't trust you, you may still be able to lead the project. You may still be able to continue. Now, when that project goes sideways quickly and things just start getting out of hand, usually that trust that you have not taken the time to build is going to get in the way because they're not actually going to turn to you. So when a project goes sideways quickly, the project manager needs to be able to handle that. If they don't trust you, they're actually going to go above you, and they're going to go to the project sponsor or the leader of the organization or director or wherever it might be, and then that's also going to make it so that you're not going to be able to manage the project, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth. We have to remember that trust is the foundation for any relationship, whether that's a personal relationship, whether that's a work relationship, whether that's somebody who's on our project team. We also have to remember that once we break trust, it's very, very hard to build that back, and that takes time. It's very important with trust within our projects, just like we're evaluating our stakeholders right at the get-go, right? Sometimes before we even have our kickoff, or I shouldn't say sometimes, all the time before we have our kickoff. We also need to start building trust right away. So while you're evaluating and analyzing your stakeholders, you might as well start building the trust. And like I said, it could be the simple coffee. However, it could be that they're starting to understand you as an influence yourself within this project. You're not just leading it, you're not just the paperwork shuffler. And when we start to build trust right away, when the project doesn't go well, which we all know many projects don't go well, there's things that come up that we have to address. When trust has been broken, you may not have time to build that trust back up again. So, in a fast moving project, you have to have trust built up right away.
Mhm.
And I
And
just want to make one more
yeah,
comment about that too, because I just realized there's a piece in there. So transparency. So the other thing too is that being transparent as possible also helps build trust. There's a lot of project managers that while the project is right at the beginning stages, they go heads down into all of their documentation and their project planning and their schedules and everything that needs to be done, and they're at risk. However, they don't take the time to put their head up and look around and see that the people who are waiting to hear about how this project goes up. So they think they're being very transparent. However, they have so much documentation out there, and they haven't spent the time to build trust and develop relationships with their project stakeholders, that the documentation is just of poor quality, or it doesn't really resonate with the stakeholders.
all right. I had a completely different question ready for us, but well, there we go. Nadian Vikars from LinkedIn asks, how can trust and transparency be built and maintained with stakeholders throughout the project? Frankly, this is probably a 8-hour course on stakeholder management. The answer to this, right? There are
Right.
so many things that you need to do. I would say two things. Number one, building trust is not something that you do once and then it's done. Building trust is an ongoing engagement. So keep engaging, keep talking, keep meeting with your stakeholders. And transparency to me starts with, you know, actually doing what you say you're doing. Be open if there is a delay. Make it clear we will be delivering on that day and plan on delivering on that day. That builds trust. That builds transparency. Where would you go with this, Barbara?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Nadine. Yes. So, like I said, transparency. Many people think transparency is document more, and in fact, it's actually not. It is about making sure that they know they can come to you about anything, which may be annoying at times that they're coming to you for every single thing. You can start to triage that as you move through your project stakeholders, because you don't need to have every single thing coming to you. However, they need to know that you're competent, and they also need to know that you're authentic. Now, I know the authentic word is quite overused nowadays. Everybody calls themselves authentic. However, when you show that you're competent, the authenticity follows. And that's when people will come to you saying, hey, this has happened, or I feel uncomfortable about this, or I don't really know if I want this to continue. This is where the trust and transparency is going to be built over the life cycle of the project, including when it's closed out. Meaning that when the project is closed and you've done a really good job building that trust throughout your project, and a question comes up about that project, or another version of that project might come up in the future, they're the first person that you're going to go to. So some of the tips I have are similar to what you said, Cornelius, is making sure that you're doing your research. You're figuring out who, like I've mentioned, who these stakeholders are, learning about them, asking lots of questions. You have to remember too, when you ask questions, don't just randomly ask questions. You want to ask really good questions, and you also want to ask them at the right time. You want to make sure that you ask the right questions at the right time. You also need to learn some history. So you don't want to be asking them questions about something that you could have done in your own research to find out the history of this, how this project came to be, or let's say it's a new version of a project, what happened in a past project. So you need to be able to learn the history. And a couple other tips is always being attentive, um, uh, being responsive when they send you something. Don't take a week to get back to them. Even if you don't know the answer, get back to them saying, I actually don't know the answer, but I will get back to you, and make sure you do get back to them. And then, of course, being proactive. So many project managers, especially in their earlier stages, they aren't as proactive as they can be, and they may not be proactive because they're nervous. They're not sure what to do next. They're hesitant. We deal with a lot of imposter syndrome being project managers. However, you can be proactive, meaning that you're looking ahead out for the next week, month, whatever it might be, and you're starting to ask questions about what that could look like. Or if you don't feel comfortable asking the questions, you start to gather the information about being proactive of what might happen next. So all of this helps that they do feel that over time they can trust you, and they also feel you're as transparent as you can be.
Excellent. I still want to go back to the question that I was about to ask before Nadine's
Okay.
question here came in. Thank you very much for that question, by the way, Nadine. And that question was simply this. I want to go back to keeping stakeholders out of the way.
Okay.
How does establishing trust help me with keeping stakeholders supportive, but unobtrusive? You know, they're on the outside looking in and they're not trying to manage me and my team and the project. How does building the trust help me with doing that?
Very good question. Most stakeholders, especially what we call high power stakeholders, so those who are responsible for the budget, they might be our project sponsor, they might be the CFO, they might be some sort of a C-suite title. They need to be involved in the beginning. They need to. And we have to understand that's what they need to do. This might be. I had one client once tell me that this project was their baby, and they really wanted this project to go well. That's great. And making sure that you work with them at that early stage to tell them, and kind of almost like pat them many times, saying, I got this, we got this. Okay, let's work together on it. Okay, we got this, we got this. And as that happens over time, you're going to notice that they're going to start pulling away a little. And that's what you want to happen. You want them to start pulling away and going off and doing the rest of what they're supposed to be doing in their job, not focusing as much of this project. You also know that they always are there. They are going to tell you as you build the trust, plus you're going to be able to tell them that they're there for you when you need them. It might be in the form of, status reporting. It might be in the form of when something isn't going so well and you need them to rely on and ask questions about. So once again, back to all the tips that we've been giving about building trust early on helps it so they stop getting in your way. They're still there, and sometimes they may come back. They may come back, especially if something isn't going so well. They may come back stronger than when they started, and that's okay too. Working with them, understanding, figuring out what level of documentation do they need. Sometimes project managers have a tendency to over document. Sometimes people have a tendency to under document. Also developing, which is once again a whole new topic in itself, but communication. What is our communication channels between that person? How are we going to communicate with them? Is it in the form of a, once once a week stand up, or sometimes some of the people that I work with, the C-suite, they actually just want information sent over email or a chat, and they don't want to meet unless something is on fire. So figuring that out, we'll find that over time they're going to naturally get out of your way.
Wonderful. Thank you. And with that answer, we have seamlessly moved from trust building straight into strategic communication. And so you talked about the communication channels. Go a little deeper here. Discuss the importance of selecting the right communication channels for stakeholder updates. Why is that important?
So I think of communication channels in two ways. First of all, I think of communication channels, which all of us who are either PMP or studying for our PMP or CAPM, we think of communication channels, which is that formula that we all learn, which is that if two people are talking, they essentially have two communication channels going back. One person is talking to the other one, and just like you and I, we have a communication channel. However, as we increase the number of people, we all know the formula, that increases the amount of communication channels. So for example, an 8-person team has many different communication channels, because not only those 8 people are talking to each other, but they're each talking around each other, and they're talking to you, and they're talking. So there's those communication channels that we have to look at. So, and in fact, with just 2 people, sometimes we have to pay attention to those communication channels, even though it might be back and forth. You and I can still miscommunicate with each other. Sometimes an 8-person team actually does really well at communicating. So that flips me over to actually another way of communication channels, which is that what tool do we use, or how do we actually communicate with each other? Many companies have tools that they use that they expect people to communicate, but nobody really likes those tools. So they go ahead and use their own, which might be something as simple as a cell phone, and they start texting each other. And so there we have another way that people are communicating that is not part of the Slack or the Basecamp or whatever it is, the Trello that people are using for their communications that is going back and forth. So we also have to look at how people are communicating overall. I was listening in preparation for this. I was listening to your past podcast, Cornelius, with Wayne Turmel, and you were talking about remote work and leadership.
Yeah.
And I actually recommend everybody listens to that episode if you haven't already, because it completely aligns with today's topic. There was a lot of things, and I want to bring a quote in there because I think this really brings up around the communication channel. So the quote is that Wayne spoke: employees talking about their point of view and employers talking about their point of view. The topic was around remote work. So it's up to a project manager to be able to communicate and get the two sides speaking the same language to each other, so that we can help people be as productive as they can. So we have to understand that the staff or project folks, they're talking about a certain point of view, and the people who are employing them are also talking about a certain point of view. So if we switch that actually to us and our project team members have a point of view, and we have a point of view. We're in the middle, and so it's up to us to be able to translate that information and make sure that we're all speaking the same language. And it doesn't mean we have to speak project language using the terminology that we all learn as part of studying to be a project manager. It means that we all have to agree on how we're going to communicate. You don't have to use actual official project terminology. You just have to be able to understand. Then once that is done, then you can start evaluating, let's say, the tooling where the communication is being passed. You pass back and forth. You may want to figure out what is the best way to use those tools. The most important thing is make sure everybody's involved in those decisions, and you're just not making the decision yourself that you're going to use this specific tool to be able to communicate, and that will help things a lot.
Wonderful. Just for those who are interested, if you want to listen to the interview with Wayne Turmel, here it is on the screen. This is episode 507, Mastering Remote Leadership Strategies for Project Managers. There's Wayne's face near the bottom right there. So go to pm-podcast.com/507 for that. However, we are still here. We are still talking about strategic communication. And I think you did mention tailoring a little bit. How do we actually need to tailor our communication, and how do we ensure that that doesn't overwhelm uh, us, because we have 20 different stakeholder groups and we have to tailor 20 different, to 20 different groups, as well as, the amount of information that we put out there. And how do we ensure that the tailoring is appropriate and the amount of communication doesn't overwhelm people?
Yeah, very good. Actually, when I first started being an official project manager, realizing that I was actually doing this job, I actually over communicated, and I just that's my style, and
It's
I
so easy,
I
isn't it?
it's so easy to do because you're like, oh, we need to communicate this, and so I had to really tailor it over time to understand what was resonating with people and what was repetitive, and what was repetitive that needed to be repeated. So it might be deadlines, it might be something that's happened that needs to be repeated so people fully understand it. Sometimes you have to do it. So finding that balance between that for me. There's other project managers who are out there that under communicate. And in fact, they under communicate so much that people don't even know they're leading the project. So understanding the balance between over communication and under communication is really, really important. And it's okay to over communicate in the beginning, and it's okay to under communicate in the beginning. Once again, because you're developing a trusting relationship with your stakeholders, you're going to find that they're going to start giving you feedback. And if they're not, start inviting them to give you feedback on your communications. They might say, that email was way too long and there was too much information in there. At least that's what happened with me. Can you shorten it to this, or perhaps don't put it out as frequently? And then if you under communicate, ask once again, do I need to communicate more? Do I need to? And they're probably going to say, yes, you actually do need to communicate more. We need to hear from you more. Also, understanding that over 90% of our communications are nonverbal. So this adds a whole other, once you learn how much of our communications are actually nonverbal and non-written down, a lot of our communication, you and I are communicating with each other through our body language and our facial expressions and our tone. And people also have to understand that many of our communications are things that we're reading off of people. You can't get that by documenting, sending a nice email out with everything. And so there's a lot of hidden things that we have to understand, and that's why really understanding the people, and back to what Wayne said, understanding their point of view and understanding the company's point of view is not going to be done just over a simple email or a document or a status report. It's going to be done over understanding the people, understanding their nonverbal communications, as well as their verbal communications and their written communications.
All right. We are moving on from strategic communication to collaborative engagement. And this now gets us sort of into managing our stakeholders a little bit, because how can we as project managers foster a collaborative environment amongst diverse stakeholders? I mean, after all, some of these people may never have worked together before. They may not even like each other, or they're normally in silos that, have sort of a negative opinion of each other. And suddenly we're telling them, well, this is a project, you got to work together. How do we get them to do that?
Yeah, collaboration once again is its whole topic in itself, as is engagement. So having these two together, we can't talk about it now. Like you said, that is its own course in itself. And in fact, we are creating one for our company right now about collaboration, especially during the project initiation stage. So you can watch for that. Once again, it's about getting to know your project stakeholders as people. I'll give you two examples. The first one is I had a very gruff project sponsor once in my early days, very gruff, and he would come in and he would sit in the meetings and just kind of barely say two words, and he'd get up and he would leave, and it was really hard pulling information out of him and having him explain what he really wanted done in this project, and I thought that's the way it was going to be. And one day he got to a meeting early, and I heard him talking to somebody else about his his bees, about his bees and his honey, like this is bees. And I overheard it and I was like, well, that's really interesting. So when the meeting was over, as he was walking out the door, I said, I'm just wondering, are you a beekeeper? And his face lit up. And for the next 20 minutes, I heard all about his bees and way more than I ever knew about bees and beekeeping and queen and, the whole thing. And he was so happy that I was taking the time to have a conversation about what he actually truly loves doing, which is being a beekeeper, not his day job, right? And next meeting, he showed up with a jar of honey for me that he had made, and it was just to, and from that point on, he wasn't as gruff. He was more contributing in the meetings. He was also answering emails to me better and chats. Um, and I'll give another example too. My daughter is an engineer, brand new engineer, a year or two out of school, and she's also, of course, no surprise, doing project management as part of her engineering job because she came from me. And her project director one day noticed that she was drinking a cream soda at her desk, at the virtual job, at her desk. And the project director made a comment about it and said, you don't see cream soda very often, like pink cream soda. And my daughter said, oh, it's just something that every once in a while it comes from my childhood. I just feel better having a cream soda. And I know this came up with Wayne's talk as well, where he talked about the gummy bears. All of you have to listen to the part
Mhm,
of
mhm,
gummy
mhm.
bears. And sure enough, a week or two later, 2 cases of cream soda comes delivered to my daughter's place, where he had thought of that little. And these things, it changed, and my daughter, like I said, was fairly new in this role, so it really made her feel like, someone's paying attention to me. And so getting to know our project stakeholders as people, that they have lives outside of this project. They may or may not want to be there. Um, that's really, really important. So another one, I know I said I'd only give 2 examples, but I'm going to give a third one because this one was cute. Cornelius, I saw a picture of you that's going to be coming up at the end of this when I was reviewing the slides with an orange cat.
Yeah, Vincent.
I, Vincent, and I have an orange cat too.
Okay.
And my orange cat's name is Aura. Once again, just that small, orange cats have a tendency to be kind of unique. And, once you have an orange cat, you kind of have that whole personality that comes with an orange cat. So just making those little comments about that. And I just saw your face light up when you said, yes, Vincent, I have an orange
Vincent,
cat.
and your cat, is it a female?
It's a female.
Very
Yes.
unusual because
You
9
see?
out of 10 orange cats are male, so or even more. So it's very
Yes.
unusual to have a female cat. Yeah,
Yeah. And
female
see
orange
how we
tabby.
were able to connect, even though we
Hmm.
weren't talking
Yeah,
about
exactly.
project management
This
and
is a perfect, masterclass in how to do this, right? For our
yeah,
listeners. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
let me bring us back here to the collaborative engagement
yeah,
environment that
yeah,
we want to be working in here. So we've got them collaborating together, and suddenly that leads to scope creep
yeah,
because as they are working together, more and more and more gets added in by our stakeholders. How do we avoid that?
yeah. First of all, capturing it right as it happens. I like to tell people, don't wait till red flags come up. You need to wait till they start to show yellow. So right at that early stage, because scope creep happens so quickly, and it gets out of the way, so it gets out of hand, I should say, very, very quickly. So as soon as you notice it happening, pull the team together in whatever way that works for your team. Some people don't like meetings, and so pulling them into a meeting, and it may be actually a culture of that organization that they don't do a lot of meetings. It might be doing something like getting up a shared whiteboard, an anonymous whiteboard, or if you're in person, actually having a whiteboard that's dedicated. I've done this before when we've had projects that have we've started to scope creep, where I've gotten permission. It's an in-person client to use one of their whiteboards, put a big sign up saying "Do not touch," and people are contributing information up there to see how we can keep this in check. Anonymous also helps, where people can contribute their ideas without having to put their name up there. Um, pulling people together in a whatever way works for them, that they want to help you address the scope creep. Many people think when scope creep I should say many people, I should clarify that. Many project team members feel that when scope creep happens, it's not their responsibility. They think it's the responsibility of the project manager or the project sponsor to clean that up. In fact, it's not. It's the entire team's responsibility. We're the ones who are simply assembling that information and passing it back along on how we can make that better. So making sure that, once again, and like I've mentioned earlier, if you don't have trust built with your stakeholders, they're not going to want to contribute to help you address the scope creep. And so really making sure that everybody's invited to come forward and give you their ideas on how they can address what's going on and how to fix it.
All right. We're moving on to our final topic, which happens to be conflict mitigation. They say there's only one project where there is no conflict. That's when you only have one person involved in the project. And even there, it's not certain that there won't be any conflict. As soon as you have two or more people, you will have conflict. So, Barbara, why is it important to address stakeholder conflicts early on, promptly, and are there any sort of common sources of conflict among stakeholders that you have found?
Yeah, I love conflict. I think I think if conflict doesn't happen in projects, you actually have a problem. when so kind of there's two parts to this: addressing conflict early on, and then what happens if conflict doesn't happen in a project. I actually did have a project once. I've only pretty much once or twice had projects with no conflict. And I was very worried because nothing was coming up. In fact, the stakeholders were very, very quiet. And I learned, and I was brand new to the team, or actually to the organization, and I didn't know anything about how this organization worked. And so I finally just reached out to the team members, and in fact, I didn't even reach out to them. It was a project that was partially in person, so it was a hybrid role. And I just walked into where they were working one day, and I observed and noticed that they were heads down working on something. And so I waited till they were done, and I came up to them and I just said, "Hey, I'm just noticing the project's going super, super well." And they said, "Oh, well, we didn't tell you. We've actually worked together for 20 years. And so we've sorted out our conflict ages and ages and ages ago. We know how to work together. So when you handed us this project, it just totally made sense for us. We've done things like this before." So that's a conflict where you still have to be cautious of what's going on. However, we have to understand that conflict is actually good as part of our projects. If conflict doesn't come up, we're not going to know that potentially two people don't see eye to eye on the direction that this project is going. And in fact, they may have not seen eye to eye on the direction the organization has been going to for a long time. And so they may have something that they have to work through. It's going to come up and show itself during your project, and you may or may not have to respond, because we have to remember there's different ways of handling conflict. Sometimes if it's something just between two people and you're noticing that it's not getting in the way of the overall team or getting in the way of getting the project deliverables out, you may actually have to avoid it for a while and kind of watch it happen, but not necessarily have to dive in there. So we have to understand that conflict can be very, very good in our project. And we also, as project managers, we know that we have our stages of team formation, forming, storming, norming, performing. And conflict needs to happen as part of those stages for our team to be able to advance to another level within the stages of team dynamics.
Mm-hmm. And what about the common sources of conflict? Is there anything? Have you come across anything where you'd say, "Yeah, this is always a problem on every single project. This comes up as a conflict."
Yeah, the common one comes up is a differencing of opinions and on how to proceed.
Yeah.
And this is where we, as project managers, sometimes just have to put our foot down. However, trying to put our foot down, we have to make sure we hear from all of those different opinions. We should hear all the different sides, compile them together, perhaps work with your project sponsor saying this has come up, these two people feel we need to do it this way, the rest of the team feels like we need to go this direction. And so figuring out how those come up. So the common one is differencing of opinion. I don't see as much of personality clashes. I know there's a lot of people out there, this is a common thing that they see as personality clashes. And I don't see as much of the personality clashes as I see it occasionally, but I see more of the differencing of opinions. And then when we look at the types of managing conflicts, I mean, there's lots out there, right? There's avoidance, there's accommodation. We can go through all the ones. Once again, I know you work with folks with that for their PMP prep. However, when we go back to the differencing of opinions, which is the common thing that I see, sometimes we have to really, like I said, make sure they know that you are taking all of their opinions into account, and you're doing a technique called accommodating. You're making sure that you might pull a little bit of one person, even though you're not quite sure if that particular part's going to work, and you're doing that, and you're pulling it all together. Of course, you're always getting approval from your project sponsor if you're changing the direction of your project in any way. So you're getting a little bit, and then sometimes you could even call that like a compromise or a collaborative effort where you're pulling everything together. However, also remembering that you're not always going to make everybody happy. And that's where we as project managers sometimes just need to say, this is the direction we're going. We're not saying we're not going to do the way that you say, but right now we're moving in this direction. In the future, we may revisit that, but this is the direction we're going right now.
All right. Thank you very much. And with this, we are moving from conflict mitigation towards closing out our discussion here today. Takeaways. Barbara, from your perspective, what are the 2, maybe even 3 things that you want our listeners to take with them from our conversation here today? What should they be doing or start doing on their projects in regards to sponsors?
Yeah, so I think the number one, and I've said this quite a few times, is it remembering that stakeholders are just plain old people. They're just trying to get through their day like you are. They have struggles, some of which might be personal struggles, and we always need to remember to treat them as real life breathing people and not just commodities in our projects. We have to remember that project management, and in our particular field, it actually I meant to say in our particular certifications, project management actually came out. I'm sorry, I got distracted. People, stakeholder management, managing stakeholders, they actually came, stakeholder management in our project management certificate was only addressed in projects about 10, 12 years ago or so. I think it was 2013 that the Project
Mhm.
Management Institute started teaching us about, oh yeah, there's people behind our projects. And we've always known that. The project managers from 40, 50 years ago, since project management began, they've always known that. They didn't have to study it. They always knew that there was people behind our projects. Technology projects have a tendency to forget that there are people behind those projects. They think of them as, and I manage a lot of very complex technical implementations. They forget that there's people who are actually managing that code. So just making sure to remember that all of them are real life breathing people, and they have needs just like you do. So that's number one. The second one is know that you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. You're gonna say the wrong thing. You're gonna send the wrong email to the wrong person. You're gonna have your project get messed up for a while. That's completely fine. Just do whatever you can to get back on track and get back on track quickly. And making sure that you admit that you've made a mistake, or if it's someone on your team that's made the mistake, make sure that you admit that your team has made a mistake, not necessarily calling out that person. So yeah, the combination of making sure that stakeholders are just regular people like you, including the leadership team. They are people, and they need to be treated like people too. Don't be afraid of them. Know that you're going to make mistakes. And then kind of which feeds into that, which I guess technically is my third, knowing that you got this, knowing that I know it's not easy to communicate with stakeholders. Some people may not have a flair for it. They may not like being around a lot of people. They may be an introvert. But knowing that, especially as that trust is built over time and you start really figuring out your communications with them, that you're going to make a difference with this project, and they're going to trust you over time, and you're going to be able to lead this. So just knowing that you got this.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for having been here all this time today for our stakeholders, our listeners, our viewers here on the Project Management Podcast, and helping them to improve stakeholder management on their projects. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. That was fun.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. As always, please visit pm-podcast.com/511 for show notes about this episode and transcripts, and also PDU information. And yes, you can earn PDUs for listening to or watching this episode. It is going to be 0.75 PDUs in the category Power Skills. Oh, and by the way, the URL you see here at the top, pm-podcast.com/511. If you change the number there at the end to 507, you'll get Wayne Termel's interview that we've been referencing twice. Our email address is info@pm-podcast.com. And finally, we have this. Keep your stakeholders close, but not too close to the critical path. And so we've come to this slide here that Barbara mentioned earlier on with me and Vincent, my orange cat. Until next time, everyone.